Don't let rampant politics and clusterfuckery ruin all your projects and your sanity. Smooth ugly penny lines and make it all make sense. Get experience by osmosis here on Corporate Underpants.
Okay, everybody, this episode has two parts. In part one, you're going to hear Dana Chisnell tell the story where she went from watching election returns in 2000 on her TV and noticing a design problem, by the way, when that was happening, to ending up in a room where sitting President Obama asked her to come and work for him, which is such a great story. Along the way, there are hanging chads, ballot design gone wrong, and beautiful work that nobody could use because a county clerk had one PC. In part two, we're going to pick up inside the federal government and get into how Dana scaled a user-centered design program across a 260,000 person department, and why she resigned in the spring of 2025, which will not be a huge mystery to many of us, and where to put your energy right now if you are one of the many of us who are looking for somewhere good to do good work. Let's get right into part one. Hi, everybody. Oh my God, I'm back live again with Corporate Underpants Live. Corporate Underpants, of course, is my podcast about the visible panty lines in the corporate, and in this case, government world, when organizational chaos shows up and ruins our products, like visible panty lines can ruin even the most fabulous outfits. I'm Tamara Adlin. I am somebody who's been thinking about this stuff and doing it for a very long time. And we have a really exciting and excellent guest today. Before I bring her on, usually I say something in the beginning of this, and what I'll say is the last time I did a recording and posted Corporate Underpants until last week was 7 months ago. Then I got wrapped around my own axle like a piece of hair wrapped around a vacuum cleaner brush and stopped myself and didn't keep posting. Even if you've done something like that with your own goals, you can start again and nobody will really blame you. And that's what I'm here to tell you. But that's all I'm going to say, because today I have a truly exceptional guest and she has so many stories. Dana Chisnell fell victim to my technical ineptitude because we had a great conversation and I somehow didn't record it. So maybe it was the gods saying that we should wait and talk to each other now, because we had all these technical issues. So Dana and I have known each other a long time through the extended network of user experience and snarkiness in that regard. And Dana is fascinating. Dana is a pioneer and thought leader in civic design, and we're going to learn what civic design is today. And that means she works on systems that large numbers of people end up interacting with. And a big part of that story was when Dana was part of the federal government at DHS, not recently, but back when Obama was trying to do great things as part of the U.S. Digital Service. And now she's left that and is doing something else. She's at Bloom, which is, I think, like a consulting organization that helps with big projects. So hi, Dana. How are you? Welcome.
Hey, Tamara, how are you?
I'm good. Where are you joining us from today?
Welcome back. I am joining you from lovely Andover, Massachusetts.
Yes. Full of, I've heard them called mass holes. I don't know. Is that true? No?
Only when you're driving up the highway.
That's right. That's perfect. All right. So Dana, I want to get started. Part of what we talked about last time was just your story of your sort of adventure and arc through the world of making things easier and more fair to use. So instead of me mangling it, you share some of your history and how you ended up where you are and what you're particularly interested in with our wonderful Corporate Underpants listeners.
So I had worked in the private sector for many years, lots of those as an independent consultant, working with tech companies, insurance, financial services, wealth management banks, things like that, in the early days of user experience design. And while I was doing that, I ran into civic design, what we now call civic design, when I happened to watch the election returns from the presidential election in 2000. At the time, I lived in San Francisco. And there was a bunch of news reporting that people were leaving the polling place thinking that they didn't vote for the person they meant to vote for. And I was like, this is an interesting design problem. I wonder how elections get done. And in that vein, I ended up contacting my district supervisor to say, hey, how do elections get done in San Francisco? And you go down to City Hall and you talk to somebody in the election department there, you could probably figure it out. So as a researcher, I did that and ended up having some great conversations. That then kicked off a series of events that connected with other people also who were working in user research and usability testing and what we now call user experience design, who also saw this as a potential design problem. And fast forward after a few seminal research projects that did things like informed the instructions on your ballots and the ballot design that you use if you vote in America. And I also had a great research partner, Whitney Quisenberry, who she and I ultimately started the Center for Civic Design in 2013 to keep doing more user research around design and elections. In the meantime, I led a crazy little project about county election websites in
Hold on
2020.
one second. Hold on one second. For those who are children and were not yet adults in the year 2000, that was a very interesting time in terms of ballot technology. Give people a little sense of what happened.
Okay. Thank you for backing me up.
Yes.
So around 2000, the most common election technology at the time for marking and casting a ballot was punch cards. This is an ancient computing technology that was used for programming computers. And how this worked for election ballots was you have this rectangular card that's marked with tiny little numbers, and around each of those numbers is a perforated box called a CHAD, and that card slides into a book. And in the book, in the spine, are holes that match up with where the positions of the CHADs are on the card. But as you can imagine, for each of the offices that you might be voting for, they're on a different page. And in the 2000 election, what happened is all the candidates are supposed to be listed on the left-hand side of the double page spread. But there were so many presidential candidates in that election that a very well-intentioned election official decided to spread the candidates over 2 pages, over the double page spread. And this interlaced where the candidates appeared and where the holes were. And a lot of people who intended to vote for one candidate actually voted for a different candidate because of the way things did or didn't line up. Like more than 10,000 in Miami-Dade County, in Florida, and a whole bunch of other places in Florida and in Georgia, as it turns out. There were multiple recounts. Ultimately, the Supreme Court stopped the recounts in Florida, and George W. Bush was declared president.
I mean, so just to give, you would walk into the booth, there's a piece of paper that was shoved into some slot, and you get a little pokey thingy.
Yep, exactly.
And the little pokey thingy, you would look, and it's like on one side of the page would be this candidate, on another side this candidate, and there were dots that were in between them, but they had hoped to make it mesh. But people were, go ahead.
There are arrows. You can look up the butterfly ballot on the interwebs, and there are images of this ballot. It's pretty famous. But yeah, there were arrows pointing to the holes, but you're in a situation where you do this maybe once every 4 years. Most people only vote every 4 years, even though there are lots of elections all the time. And maybe you're voting for the first time. You don't actually know how this works. And you might be stressed. I know a guy who has a master's degree in political science, and he always contacts me after major elections saying, I am still not sure that I got this right. And so even if you are a very experienced voter, you could have gone in to the voting booth in Florida, and it would not have been difficult for you to punch the hole, to push the CHAD out of the punch card. There we go.
Yep.
And end up voting for the candidate you did not intend to vote for.
Yes. And so this is all marked up, but if you're watching us on video, you can see, and just search for the butterfly ballot. But it really is tricky to figure out exactly where you're supposed to click. And it wasn't even a click, it was a paper ballot. All right, so
Yeah.
this was a huge, ginormous story at the time because who would have thought that something as quote unquote simple as choosing who to vote for, and all you have to do is poke the correct thing, right? But meanwhile, there were all these stories about people with magnifying glasses and seeing if you meant to poke this one or trying to figure out intention, or people walking out and are instantly realizing that they voted for the wrong person and completely panicking because of a paper design that somebody did to try to save space.
Yeah. Yes. Also, it was the best technology at the time. This was an improvement on lever machines, which is a mechanical voting system, like metal cogs and wheels that, and this is where the phrase pulling the lever comes from, where you can see the full face of about a list of candidates, and there are levers at each one, and you are turning the lever one way or the other to select your candidate. And then turn the lever to cast your ballot. And the punch cards were definitely an improvement, made tallying a lot easier. And the thing that people forget about the lever systems, even though there's this romantic nostalgia for them, is that those cogs wear out and they can mess up. The way that worked is that marked a paper tape. And so in the annals of election technology, moving from lever machines to punch cards was pretty good. And one of the reasons that the punch cards was way better was because you could tally votes much faster and have reliable results. Now, the problem that we saw loud and clear that had always existed but was magnified in the 2000 election was that if you don't push the CHAD all the way out, then somebody has to interpret the voter's intention. Did you mean to push that out, or was it a mistake? Like you might have pushed a little bit and then pulled back. And so that's why you see that picture of the dude with the magnifying glass, right? Because the CHADs are tiny. And he was making a determination about whether the voter who used that punch card actually had intended to push that CHAD out to mark their ballot.
And here is a picture of that dude. This picture was everywhere. This is like a guy with red eyes holding up a magnifying glass to this like little punch card piece of paper. Robert Rosenberg, that's a judge of Broward County Canvassing Board. And this picture became infamous because of this whole situation. Let me ask you something. Again, I'm going to slow you down to speed up, not to speed up, but what were you working on right before this all happened? Where were you in your career? What were you working on?
I was a freelance independent consultant. I'm mostly doing a lot of usability testing for companies like Intuit and Cisco and some companies that don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Especially the .com boom had come and gone at that point. And I lived in San Francisco, so I worked with a lot of startups.
A lot of startups and bigger companies. And then usability testing is, I like to refer to it as looking for wrinkles in the carpet, running a few individuals, usually not too many, through a particular experience to see if they get caught up in something. And if it's like a wrinkle in the carpet, if one person trips over it, lots of people are going to trip over it. Then you saw what was going on this national scale. And at that point, like big would have equaled working for bigger and bigger companies in our field. That's how things went, unless you decided on startups. And you saw writ large, a massive usability and interaction.
Yes. This was ultimately about world peace, right? This is the president of the United States, the most powerful person on the planet, arguably. And I am pretty sure that things would be different today if the outcome of that election had been different.
Yep. And so, and the technology part of that, which drove all of us in the field crazy at the time, was this is freaking paper. We were trying to get more influence on technology and websites and design and how to click. And then we see this massive cluster happening with this stupid paper documents that were then deciding our fate. So you said, okay, so bringing us back to where you were, you said, you were like, how does all this work?
Yeah, this
And
seems like an interesting design
it
problem.
seems like an interesting design, the understatement of the freaking century, literally. And so you went to find out how the hell does this happen? And were you
Yeah.
doing that to change your career? Were you doing this out of
No,
curiosity?
no, I did it as a hobby for many years. I charged Wells Fargo and B of A exorbitant fees and used that to subsidize my Civic Tech habit. We didn't call it Civic Tech then. Like, it wasn't a thing. Um, so that I could afford to take time to go do this other thing.
Okay. So then what did you do? You started learning about this from the election officials in, I guess, in San Francisco where you were at the time?
Yeah, I basically did a kind of stakeholder interview with some people who worked for the election department there. In the meantime, Whitney and other friends in the practices around usability testing and user experience design also went off in various directions, including working on standards. So in 2003, I think, yes, as a response to what happened in the election in 2000, Congress passed a law called the Help America Vote Act. And that set aside $3.9 billion, which was a lot of money in 2003, for all of the election jurisdictions across the country to buy new voting equipment. And the assumption, and it's baked into the law actually, is that you would, if you're a county or a parish or a township, wherever your elections get run, you would buy touchscreen voting systems, high tech touchscreen stuff. The problem ended up there being that those systems didn't have a good way of doing recounts, and it was hard for voters to verify that the computer was, in fact, registering their vote as they believed that they had marked it. So
It's
that
almost comical it is comical looking back on it. We have a problem with butterfly ballots. People aren't sure that they voted for the right person. Somebody goes back and tries to determine intent from looking at the back of the card to see what person, and then they have this big influx of money. Oh, we're gonna solve this with touch screens without thinking that, like, how are people gonna be sure that their vote was counted
right.
as they intended? Which it doesn't take a rocket surgeonist to realize that a touch screen isn't gonna be much better for that.
It didn't take long to figure it out. Actually, it took a couple of elections before election officials were like, this is not going to work very well. Bunch of remediation happened. Things got attached to these voting systems. So you got a paper tape that showed how the ballot was marked and cast. This made it possible also to record a vote record in the system where you could do recounts. But in the meantime, the Help America Vote Act also launched a whole bunch of other things, including the Election Assistance Commission, which is an independent commission that is bipartisan, that does what it says it does. It assists people running elections at the state and county level in administering elections securely, safely, etc. And it continues today, fortunately, that they also direct the National Institute of Standards and Technology on voluntary voting system guidelines. The federal government cannot impose standards on election equipment legally. But what does that mean anymore? So it's called the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, the VVSG, to create standards for voting systems that can then be tested to and certified for federal elections. So security, hardware, software, accessibility, and usability were included in those standards as well. I think we're up to version 2 or 2.1 these days. Anybody out there who knows the answer to this question, chime in. But there was a lot of research that went into developing those standards, including doing testing with people with disabilities, testing around plain language and what people understand in instructions on ballots and
Here
things
with
like that.
this, that this was you were still not first of all, let me just say something. Maybe there's a reason that our conversation didn't get recorded properly last time because there's a whole other color on this now because we're talking in at the end of March 2026. In hearing you talk about this sort of massive amount of effort and money that
Mhm.
went into making elections fair, usable, accessible, right? That wasn't color. That color didn't quite exist in this shade. Yeah, that's yet back when we talked last time. And so, what year are you talking about now when there was this big?
So the Help America Vote Act passed in 2003. This launched the EAC in 2004-ish. Then the research happened in 2004, 5, 6, 7 is when I was working on it.
In what capacity
And
were who were you working for?
I was an independent consultant
Okay.
doing work with NIST, with the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Okay, so you had only in a few years gone from doing usability tests for Intuit or whoever to working on something on a social technology scale. You had actually moved yourself over,
Yeah.
which is not easy to do. I think there's so many people right now actually in our industry who are like wanting to switch or move. So that's an inspiring thing.
Yeah, I hear that. Also, the numbers of us who were doing that kind of work was pretty small at the time, especially compared to the number of people who are doing experience design research today. It was possible
Yeah.
in 2000 to know practically everyone in the United States who was doing this work.
Okay, so then now we're up to you're working as a consultant or contractor to NIST on these election issues. Keep us going. Let's see what happens next with you.
What happens next is the Election Assistance Commission contracts with the AIGA, the Graphic Arts Association, to do some research and develop a design system, basically, although it wasn't called that, for printed ballots. And AIGA did a ton of research in the field with lots of people of different abilities and languages and things like that. And they came up with a beautiful design and a gorgeous document that was about 350 pages. Now, remember, this is before iPhones. This is still when a lot of people don't even have email addresses. And the EAC sends this thing out on CDs to county clerks, some of whom don't even actually have PCs. And it is overwhelming to those folks to think that they might need to or be ordered to update the design on their printed ballots. And they're like, no. Also, it turns out that none of the commercially available voting systems at the time could actually support this design. And so this led a bunch of the people who I loved working with and I to rethink, like, how could we move better design forward in this space? And where we got to was basically a top 10 list of things. If you were going to do only these 10 things to improve ballot design to ensure that people voted the way they intended, do these things. And so AIGA came out with a list. It was an okay list. It was a designer's list. It was not really an election official's list. And that got some uptake with marketing by people who were showing up at conferences where election officials were and things like that. But it didn't get very much uptake. And so I had this crazy idea to create a thing that I ultimately called the Field Guides to Voter Intent, to ensuring voter intent. They are still live on the civicdesign.org website. And they started with 4 topics like ballot design, usability testing, plain language. And I can't even remember what the 4th one was. I should have had these handy as props. They're cute, adorable little books that each had 10 guidelines. So if you pop open the
This little
writing
guide.
instructions, yeah, those are the ones. The print versions are 3 by 5. They each have one guideline and an example to go with it, so you know how to incorporate it.
Oh, look how
And
cool.
yeah, and we ran a Kickstarter campaign to raise $20,000 for the first printing, which we did achieve the goal and printed the first edition and immediately sent them out to all the people who we knew who were working in elections. And that gained a bunch of steam. We started to see improvements in ballot design. This, along with telling people, like I mentioned, there are many more elections than most people realize. There are not only presidential elections every 4 years and midterms every 2 years, but there are local. I voted in a local election here in Andover on Tuesday for school board and town council. So there are these natural chances to iterate on small design changes, especially with small numbers of voters. You can try a thing out, make sure that nothing breaks, that everything goes as smoothly as you hoped it would. And then in the next election, try some other small thing.
Okay, so I want to interject a corporate underpants moment here, because corporate
Yeah, do it.
underpants is really about how organizational chaos or confusion or red tape or whatever you want to call it, or legacy systems can interfere with the best ideas or designs or intention, even when everybody agrees, right? So at the time, the idea of fair elections was not contentious, right?
So it was not.
No, it was like, yes, we want fair elections. And what I heard you say is that one of the first projects you did was send out designs and actual designs for people to use. And the corporate underpants moment there is that even though these designs worked, the legacy systems and software or even printing budgets or whatever meant that they could not be digested by the existing infrastructure.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. We did not do all the work that we needed to do to understand the larger business ecosystem and the challenges in it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like Jared Spool talks about in one of his talks, this idea of not an idea, but a redesign of a boarding pass that would have been much easier to read. But in his story, which everybody should go watch, he talks about the fact that they actually didn't have printers that could handle color. And so the fact that everybody agreed that this was a much better design didn't matter because of the internal technology and the expense it would have taken to change the printers back then. And so AIGA, all the best minds. Here you go, folks. Here it is. It's all designed for you. Take it. And they were like, yeah, unfortunately. And so then the next thing you did were these cute books, which had the little hanging chad sort of suggestion in I like the way they were designed. These 10 little cute little books of, if you're going to do it yourself, don't center the type. Don't use all caps, right? And then you had to raise money to send these out, which were then suggestions. You could take what they could from them. And this is classic. This is classic for those of us interested in how org structure stands in the way of everybody doing a great design, even though everybody wants to. It's bigger and deeper and has more weird roots and connections, no matter what it is. And this is a great example because the intention of everybody at that time was, let's make
elections better
and more accessible. And even when you tried to do the work for them and got AIGA, which is the ultimate in graphic design resources at that time, and maybe still, they could not digest them. It's like corn. Everybody loves it, but nobody can digest it.
Something like that. Yes.
Something like that. It's the see you later design.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And admittedly, and I think the Election Assistance Commission at the time did not understand that on the ground in Midway, Texas, where there's a county clerk who does everything from registering kids for school to making sure that your garbage gets picked up and running elections, that she had one PC in the office and it was not going to run InDesign or whatever the equivalent was at the time to actually lay out a ballot. And even if she could, her printer couldn't deliver on what this design did. And even if they could, the way ballot scanners work and tally machines worked at the time, they would not have been able to process.
Okay. So if you're listening to this and feeling like, why can't I get people to listen to me, or why won't they use our good work? You're hearing a real live example. And I also picture you, Dana, as somebody that throughout your career was then forced to, and probably wanted to. Then you were like, where's the problem? It must be one level up from here. It must be one level up. It must be one level up from there, right? So you start with San Francisco curiosity. You end up starting to do this work that's meant to go out on a national scale. And you keep doing great work and it just keeps smacking into a wall.
Yeah.
And you just didn't stop. You just kept learning.
No. No. Also, I want to put in a plug. You mentioned how cute the field guide design is. That was done by Drew Davies at Oxide Design. He's an amazing designer and was my partner on creating the field guides from the beginning. So shout out to Drew.
And they're really
Um,
appealing and inviting. And that matters because nobody wants to read a big fat report.
It did. It did matter. And in fact, I have a nice example of this. I ultimately moved away from San Francisco in 2010. But we published the field guides in 2012, 2013. And I sent a set of field guides to the clerk and a bunch of other people who I work with in the election department in San Francisco, just to say, hey, thinking about you. And a year or so later, after I moved, I went back for a visit. And actually, it must have been 2014. I went back for a visit. And I was just going to pop in for a coffee with my friend Barbara. And she's, oh, I got the conference room and I have gathered everybody up and we have some stuff to show you. And so there was somebody from each of the different areas of work in the election department who brought befores and afters of things that they had made. Forms, voter education stuff, voter information guides, posters, flyers for various kinds of events, ballots, including vote by mail ballots. And they went around the table and they showed me their befores and afters. And I was like, what happened? This is great. And Barbara said, we had these little books
Oh
and it
my
all
God,
made it
did you
feel
cry?
so doable.
I would have cried. And how many years later was that after you had produced those? That was
It was just a couple of years, actually. Yeah. So by then there was another generation of voting systems, and the thinking around how voting systems supported elections had also changed at that point, right? Like when we're looking at 2000, and this is true of like household and appliances at the time too. You bought a refrigerator, you expected it to last for 20 years. Nothing lasts that long anymore. And election equipment is similar, right? It stays with where we are in the rest of the technology ecosystem. And so by then we're on, I don't know, iteration 4-ish of voting systems where you have touchscreen systems, but they either generate a printed ballot that is voter verifiable, human readable, and human countable, or you mark a paper ballot, you put it into a system, you can see it get scanned, and that's the thing that gets tallied.
okay. Let's continue with you. I think we're up to maybe 2014. Where's the next big thing that happened?
Yeah. So in 2013, Whitney and I started the Center for Civic Design, which she continues to do brilliant work at with an incredible team on all kinds of facets around elections. And we did a bunch of work around voter information for low propensity voters. But I had also, leading up to that period, done this crazy study on county election websites in the months leading up to the 2012 presidential election. Now, the web was a really different place in 2012 from what it is now. Generally, websites were not very good, and municipal localities did not have very good websites at all. In fact, it's like one county that used a Pink Panther theme for their election website. Yeah. It was pretty bad out there. But I got to do this study. My main partner in this project was Sid Harrell, but a lot of people contributed to this. We looked at 140 or 50 county election websites. There are more than 5,000 counties in the United States, by the way. About a third of those counties didn't even have websites at the time. So we took a sample of the ones that did, and we mapped out the real estate, basically, top left to bottom right, and what appeared there in terms of dominant visuals in headings and in graphics that would give us an indication of what we thought election officials believed was important for voters to know about. And then we did some usability testing, and I asked voters what their big questions were leading up to the election and how they would find the answers to that, and then asked them to go to their local county website to try to find the answers to those questions. It turns out the mental models of election administrators and the mental model of voters is really different from each other. And that was a big revelation. So I started giving presentations about this study all over the place because I just wouldn't shut up about it. And I was invited to be
What were you trying to get across? What were you trying to get people to hear?
that the government process, which is largely time driven, there are chronological deadlines, is not the way voters think about voting. Voters make decisions about whether they're going to vote based on what is being voted on and whether it's worth their investment in the time and energy it takes to understand who's on the ballot, what other issues are on the ballot, how much they care about it, and are they going to go stand in line to get a ballot, mark it, and cast it. There's a whole bunch of behavioral economics that go into these decisions. And so the websites that we had reviewed were all based on these chronological deadlines that election officials have. Voter registration opens on this day, it closes on this day. Requests for absentee ballots start on this day, they close on this day. Election is on this day. Ballots must be in by 8 p.m. when the polls close. Counting starts at that point.
So this is
But-
again underpants. This is you are not the user. This is someone, a county, putting together a website that people go to related to an election coming up.
Yeah.
Just talking about the last day you can submit your form to whatever.
Right, which makes perfect sense if you're an election official, right? You need to make sure that people know what the deadlines are and what their options are for voting. But from your point of view, everything is date driven on what those deadlines are.
Right.
But for voters, that's not true. They know when election day is, most of them, and they're deciding up until the very last minute, is it worth it for me to engage in this activity?
Which has nothing to do with what the deadlines are. So
Right.
how would you have recommended, what did you have specific recommendations for what?
Yeah, so we actually proposed an information architecture for their websites that we published in an academic paper for the Human Computer Interaction Society or whatever. It's out there somewhere. And also created a template that we shared around, and a lot of those places picked it up.
And it was more
Little
about
tidbits of, you see evidence of this today in a bunch of places where if you end up in an election website and one of the first three things is what's on my ballot, that came from that research.
Oh, okay. Oh, what's on my ballot? Good Lord. Seems basic. Yep. And that wasn't happening before. So,
No,
and that's really powerful. And sometimes the kind of influence we can hope to have or expect to have is different than we thought it would be. But that's a huge thing. Getting what's on my ballot onto a website that's supposed to help voters is a big, fat, hairy deal, it turns out.
yeah, but it's also, I will say, as soon as election officials understood this, that their view was different from their voters' view, they were like, okay, tell me what to do.
Right.
And they were on board with doing that voter ed from their website all the way through all the other stuff that they did.
Okay. All right. What's the next step? Where did you go from here?
So because I wouldn't shut up about this county election website, I was giving this presentation as a warm-up act to the first class of Presidential Innovation Fellows in Washington, D.C. And these people were not there to see me, but
You had there to see.
they were there to see Jared Spool.
Oh, okay. To see, yeah, many people do show up to see the Jared Spool show of Presidential Innovation Fellows. And so Jared was one of those?
So Jared was the main speaker.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so I was the warm-up act.
Yeah.
And there were some people from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy there, along with a couple of presidential innovation fellows who I happen to know. And they came up to me after my talk, and they were like, "But what if we created a style guide for all the federal websites and made all the departments and agencies use it? Wouldn't that make things better for residents of the United States?" And I was like, "That's a dumb idea. That's never going to work."
Why?
But this led to a really wonderful evening and excellent friendships. And then a year after that, one of those people called me up and she's, "We're doing a thing. It's at the White House. I want you to come. I can't really tell you very much about it, but I think it will be worth your while." So I'm going to DC from Massachusetts at my own expense for a thing that I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know who else is going to be there. But because my friend Erie said I should be there, I did it. And it turned out to be the first roundtable for what would be the United States Digital Service that was formed by President Obama, largely in response to the failure of the rollout of healthcare.gov in 2013.
Okay. So you make these friends. One of them says you should really show up. You walk into the White House? Is that what you did?
It was no, because you can't actually walk into the White House.
Of course, yeah.
But there's a building right next door called the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, the EOB, and that's where the meetings were being held that day. And there were lots of interesting individual sessions and group conversations about what services delivered over the public internet by the federal government should be like and how that would get done. But we did ultimately end up in the West Wing toward the end of that day, hearing directly from President Obama.
Okay, thanks for joining me for part one. I want to leave you right here because something is about to happen. Dana had been dragging developers into usability sessions, making them watch real users struggle with things they built. And then one day she went to find them and they were all gone. Listen to part two to find out where they went, what happened next, and what it actually looks like when a design culture starts to shift inside a giant, truly impossible organization. See you for part two. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Corporate Underpants, and there's lots more to come. If you have any projects that you need my help on, if you're interested in coaching to become a senior product leader through understanding alignment in politics, or if you're interested in any of the classes or books that I'm developing, please visit my website, adlininc.com, and get in touch.